Explore the harmony of health and holiness through a Catholic lens. Discover how faith rooted in tradition fosters vibrant living. This podcast rebroadcasts the weekly Becoming Gift segment on Morning Offering on Ave Maria Radio. You can check out the Physically Spiritual podcast from Awakened Catholic for my long-form discussions and presentations, or you can find my Substack at becominggift.com. This is your host, Andrew Reinhardt.
Today I want to talk about small acts of self-denial, that we shouldn't sleep on small acts. We're going through a series on fasting for Lent, and I think sometimes with Lent we might be tempted to make big gestures, maybe read the life of a saint and imitate a kind of fasting we heard from there. Maybe our favorite Catholic influencer on the internet gave us a good idea this season. But I don't know about you. By the time I get to about Laetare Sunday, I think, I don't know how well I'm doing with these big things I had plans for this Lent. So the way the Lord's been speaking to me is that don't sleep on the small things. In 1 Samuel, when it's talking about King David being selected to be the king, it says, "Do not judge from his appearance or from his lofty stature, because I have rejected him. God does not see as a mortal who sees the appearance. The Lord looks into the heart." But this idea here really talking about God's rejection of Saul in spite of his height and his handsomeness and his natural abilities, and God choosing David. Now, what's interesting is in a couple verses after this, it talks about how handsome David is. So it's not that David wasn't handsome, or that outside doesn't mean anything, of course, but that God's looking for something deeper, something in the character, something in the heart. So we might be tempted to focus on grand gestures and massive changes, but sometimes a grand gesture can actually be full of ego, right? I'm the person that fasted for 40 days. I didn't do a single of this or that, and I'm going to put up a sign and show the world about it. This is interesting. A 2010 study looked at small acts of self-control. A 2-week study where one group, the practice group, focused on small acts that were consistently practiced, like noticing and improving your posture, or throughout the day, noticing your mood and journaling a little bit, doing something like keeping a food journal, recording what you eat during the day. So some small act. And the control group, on the other hand, of course, didn't do anything. They did something completely unrelated, like math problems or something. So what they did then is that after those 2 weeks, they give the participants a grueling test of self-control. And this is what they noticed, that the participants who practiced the small acts over the 2 weeks showed increased stamina and less ego depletion, meaning like they were able to sort of handle the situation better, that they didn't necessarily have to be doing something related to the big challenge, that those small acts, even if it was in a completely different area of life than that grueling challenge at the end of the study, it didn't matter. That the people that had practiced the small acts consistently over 2 weeks showed increased stamina and increased strength, even if the skill was completely unrelated. And the third thing it found was that this kind of analogy we use sometimes for willpower, it being like a muscle, was actually confirmed, right? That you're able to sort of strengthen the willpower muscle and then be stronger at doing everything in your life. And I think this is beautiful because it really affirms a Catholic idea of virtue. There's another threat when we make large gestures that sometimes we might not actually address what's present. Meaning we all struggle with a lot of particular things, little foibles, weaknesses, things that annoy our neighbors and our friends and our family, things that make us worse at the work we do. And so when we are sometimes making big gestures, we might be striving for an ideal that's not related to the concrete situation of our life. Meaning I'm going to not eat food for 40 days. But maybe I can't stop looking at my phone every 10 seconds, right? So you see how, we might be trying to make this grand gesture, but on the other hand, ignoring something that really needs to be addressed. Or the grand gesture itself might be a way to avoid what the Lord is actually calling us to do. Lord, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to do this for you, and this looks pretty good, isn't it? So here's some examples from my life of how this can play out. And I heard this once, if you're at a big group gathering, and you have that plate of food or that buffet, take one of the worst pieces in the dish.
Wow. Yeah, right.
Right? Leave the good piece, the big piece, the juicy piece, the piece with the most cheese. Leave that for someone else. Just don't salt your food to taste. That's another thing for me. I grew up in a family we used a lot of salt. So just not salting. No one will notice whether or not you put salt on your food, unless you put a ton on.
Right.
People might notice then, but just not salting it and making that small act, just saying, Lord, I give this to you. I give this up for these people. I give this up for this intention. Another one for me is just putting myself to bed at night. The simple act of putting the phone down, turning off the TV, just going to bed, even when I don't want to, even if I'm in the middle of something. Another example would be letting go of my plan. I always have a little plan in my head. Like, I'm going to come home, I'm going to try to get this chore done, I'm going to try to get that project done. I want to, get on the computer and finish this before I get to work tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera. But just entering into what's there, meaning I enter home and I receive what the Lord has brought me, maybe the messiness on the floor or the dishes in the sink or whatever, and then giving myself to the work that God's presenting to me in the concrete moment. Just that little act of self-denial, of giving up my little design in my head. So these are all examples of ways that maybe it can be a way to renew our Lent. Maybe you've struggled with what you planned on in the beginning of Lent. And this focusing on small acts of self-denial might be a way to renew your Lent or recover that. But know that these small acts don't mean small impact, because God sees the heart. And the small, consistent acts of self-control add up to a stronger will,
Right.
add up to a virtuous character.
I would add, Andrew, that in gatherings that I go to where there's food, I think a small sacrifice would be to take the last piece or the last thing in the dish. I hate it when we're all cleaning up and there's one, because nobody wants to take the last piece.
Yeah.
So sometimes even things that we're trying to be kind and generous, sometimes you can be kind and generous by helping the hostess so she doesn't have to try to put away one spoonful of something.
There's no greater compliment to a cook than an empty serving dish.
Yeah.
Bingo.
I like the conversation on the grandiose gestures, right?
Yeah.
Because isn't that we all want to do
Yep.
not only and you could definitely say as part of ego, and I mean obviously we all have to check ourselves on that, but just from a spiritual standpoint too, we all just want to do the big things. We at the end of the day we want to say, oh, even to ourselves, we accomplished that big thing. But to your point, Andrew, you got to do the small things. I read every year, Practicing the Presence of God from Brother Lawrence. I just don't live it.
Yeah,
To your
yeah.
point, I've got a plan, I've got an idea, and as soon as something comes and messes with that, the last thing I think is, oh, that's God's plan for me today. No, it messed
Yeah.
up what I thought was God's plan for me today.
Well, and I think so often we tend to think what we can do out there, and we're not always thinking about our responsibilities at home, too.
Yeah.
How do I love well at home? We're just thinking about, oh, I got to go out there and do all this big stuff.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Gift. You can catch the show live every Wednesday at 8 a.m. Eastern on Ave Maria Radio. You can also find my long-form podcasts, discussions, and presentations on the Physically Spiritual podcast. Subscribe to my Substack at becominggift.com to find more from me, and don't forget to like and subscribe.